Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I'm grateful to the Conservative Party for making time for this important debate this afternoon. Presiding Officer, transparency matters. In the boardrooms of the private sector and indeed in the corridors of the Scottish Government, transparency matters. And William Douglas reminds us that sunlight is the best disinfectant. He is not wrong. Without it, the rot sets in. And there is very little sunlight in the Scottish Government right now. Thousands of grieving families are looking to these inquiries for the answers, and UK Government WhatsApps released already so far show minute by minute what was really going on behind the scenes in London and how those decisions were made. It shows that the discussions behind an order were often as important as the order itself. That the UK COVID inquiry had to instruct Scottish ministers to return to this Parliament and set the record straight speaks to, at best, a casual attitude towards the work of the inquiry and, at worst, an attempt to undermine it. Whichever analysis is correct, the Scottish Government has been deliberately slow-walking its cooperation with Baroness Hallett and her Commission. The inquiry's requests were in black and white. They could not have been clearer. The government said that they had interpreted it too narrowly. Narrowly. I said this in my intervention to the Deputy First Minister. That defence would suggest a minimal and grudging approach to cooperation instead of being as open as possible. It was only when the pressure from the inquiry became too great, when the pressure from the media became too great, that the Scottish Government were finally embarrassed into playing ball. I really hope that this does not delay the evidence and findings of the inquiry, or worse still, act as a barrier to the answers that those families are entitled to. I'm also grateful to Anas Sarwar for bringing forward Labour's amendment today. It gives us an opportunity to debate the functionality and the application of the Ministerial Code. Should it just be for Humza Yousaf and his ministers to reserve themselves to the independent advisor? Or should there be provisions, more like the Ethical Standards Commission, where any third party who presents a threshold of sufficient evidence can trigger an investigation? Presiding Officer, we'll hear a lot from government benches today about the volume of messages that have now finally been passed on by the government to the inquiry. But drowning it in 28,000 messages, unredacted as they may be, will not make up for what isn't there. It has been reported that the messages handed over by the Scottish Government are mainly from group chats featuring 3 or more ministers and civil servants and do not include one-to-one exchanges between members of the government. Reports also suggest that the former First Minister and senior government officials were routinely excising their message feeds. And we can argue about what the SNP were asked for and when, but for me, this is the rub of the matter. Secrecy, selective memory, a failure to record or retain the records of the most important meetings are nothing new to the SNP, or in particular the former First Minister. And thinking back at that time, it was an unprecedented time. We all laid party politics aside. More trust existed then between opposing front benches than ever before or since. Nicola Sturgeon said her government would make mistakes, and we all accepted that in the knowledge and understanding that we were in uncharted waters. And I will give way to Daniel Johnson. Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way. Would he agree with me that some of the evidence that we've already heard from the UK COVID inquiry about UK government decisions, that what's been revealing is that the culture and the way the organisation was making decisions which were as important as actually the substance of the actual decisions themselves? Do we not have the same interest in having the same information about the Scottish Government?
Alex Cole-Hamilton, give you
grateful for Daniel Johnson's intervention. Absolutely. That cuts to the heart of this, that the background chatter behind the decisions that were taken are as important, and the culture that they reveal are as important as the decisions themselves. And we all agreed that the government would make mistakes, but that if those decisions were backed by science, then they would stand up to the scrutiny of the inquiry we all knew was certain to follow the pandemic. Presiding Officer, if Nicola Sturgeon has deleted key messages which informed her response, messages that might show how she weighed science against politics in the consideration of those decisions, then she too undermines the work of this inquiry. A particular tragedy of Scotland's pandemic story lies in the decision taken in April 2020 to move untested and COVID-positive patients from our hospitals to our nation's care homes. But we will forever be denied a comprehensive understanding of the discussion that led to that, because we will never have all the messages. There has long been belief that the former First Minister would deliberately breach the trust of collective four-nation decision-making to dash out announcements before anyone else, to look like she was leading the field. that she took decisions based solely on a desire to be different from Boris Johnson. She will never be able to fully dismiss those suggestions because we will never have all of the messages. Lives and livelihoods hinged on these decisions, and yet people at the heart of this, Nicola Sturgeon, her advisers, were erasing the discussions that underpinned decisions like these. Those grieving families, those who've been failed, may be forever denied the full story behind the calls that she made, the gall of it, the barefaced mendacity of it, to state repeatedly in this chamber, from the floor on which we stand, that Nicola Sturgeon and her advisers would open themselves up to the full scrutiny of an inquiry that we all knew was sure to follow the pandemic. And then, it seems, to go home at night and systematically delete the very evidence those messages could offer. That reality, presiding officer, could yet prove to be one of the biggest scandals in the history of this Parliament. Presiding officer, sunlight is the best disinfectant, but this is a governing party that is afraid of the light, afraid of the truth that they conceal, and afraid of the judgment that would surely follow, be rendered by the people of Scotland should those ever truths come to light. I fully expect the SNP and Greens will protect their leaders today, but if this debate has achieved nothing else, it should at least exert pressure on the government to offer greater cooperation to the UK COVID inquiry and, by extension, offer answers and a degree of closure to the grieving families at the heart of this.
Thank you.